Oh, hi. Welcome to number 10 in the Child Study Press podcast series. And today we're talking about the walk from Robe, or more particularly, the walk of Chinese gold miners from South Australia into the Victorian goldfields in the 1850s. Mostly it's focused on Robe because that's become the most dramatic element in the history. But in fact, many people actually did walk initially from Adelaide all the way to the goldfields as well, or took steamers from Adelaide to Robe. There are a variety of ways. And all of this is expounded in my book, or child study book publication, Every Requisite for a Campaign Upon the Goldfields, which is a quote from a newspaper report observing Chinese gold miners and how they were very well equipped. And I think this is an aspect of the history that we don't understand. This idea, the stereotype is of people poor people fleeing China, kind of arriving in a goldfield, scrabbling around, getting gold. But in fact, they were very well organised in many ways. And of course, most particularly, they were organised in avoiding the poll tax that was imposed upon them by Victoria, the colony of Victoria, and deciding, at least the agents were deciding in Hong Kong to ship people via boats to Adelaide or Robe, and in particularly not to go from Melbourne to Adelaide or Robe, but of course the ship, people don't realise the actual route was via Swan River, Perth, and stopping at Adelaide first before going to Melbourne. So in actual fact, once the poll tax was imposed, which said that you had to pay £10 to get off a boat at Melbourne, all they had to do was stop early and get off at Adelaide, or increasingly in 1856 particularly at the small port of Robe, which was nearer, of course, to the border. Now all this is explained in the book. The discussion that the bots do is much more of a summary, just to give you a taste. And what I will do in the future is I will probably do a series which will focus much more on the details. Perhaps 4 or 5 podcasts will cover the whole book because there's a lot of detail in there. But just for a taste, I'll give you this little bots giving you a little discussion as to what's generally called the Robe Walk, where it's been dramatised in many ways, and which in actual fact is a much more fascinating story than the myths would allow. So I hope you enjoy.
Welcome to the deep dive. We're diving into a really fascinating chapter of history today, one full of twists and turns and maybe even a few busted myths along the way. We're talking about those Chinese gold seekers who landed in Robe, South Australia back in the 1850s, the Robe walkers. We've got a ton of sources to dig through: historical accounts, journals, even some intriguing local tales. And to help us separate fact from fiction, we've got our expert with us.
What always gets me about this topic is how much the story's been, well, kind of romanticized over time. We end up with these myths that don't quite match up with what these folks actually went through.
Yeah, let's unpack some of those myths. One big one is how the arrival of these Chinese gold seekers at Robe was this total shock, like a surprise invasion or something.
Right, very dramatic, but not very accurate. Our sources actually show how those discriminatory taxes slapped on Chinese miners in Victoria, the next colony over, were a huge reason they ended up in Robe. It wasn't random, not at all. It was a calculated move in response to a very specific economic situation, and frankly, the social climate too.
So they were strategically navigating a pretty complex situation. I bet those dramatic stories also conveniently forget that Robe had already seen hundreds arrive before the landed cakes even showed up, didn't they?
Exactly. That ship, the one arriving directly from Hong Kong in 1857 with all those passengers, it's always made out to be this huge shock. But if you check out the records from back then, like that police journal, it's more like, well, this is busier than usual. They definitely noticed, but it's not like Robe was totally caught off guard.
Okay, so a significant event, sure, but not out of the blue. Makes you think, right? Now, let's talk about another myth, that idea that these passengers were tricked into landing at Robe by some, scheming ship captains trying to dodge those Victorian taxes.
Ah, yes, the classic canny captain myth.
Mhm.
It's a good story, no doubt, but it really downplays the agency of those Chinese gold seekers, makes them seem like they were just along for the ride.
Like they were victims instead of the strategic thinkers they actually were.
Exactly. Now, sure, some captains might have tried to get around the rules, but the evidence really points to the gold seekers being much more aware than they're giving credit for.
Yeah.
A lot of them were traveling under this sophisticated credit ticket system, which is a far cry from how many Europeans were heading to the goldfields. In fact, we even have a quote from a passenger who was pretty upset about being tricked into landing at Robe instead of Port Phillip. They knew what was up.
No way they were calling out these shady practices way back then. That's amazing. It really changes the narrative, doesn't it? Suddenly you've got these robe walkers, not as helpless passengers, but as people who are taking control, shaping their own destinies. So tell me more about this credit ticket system. What made it so different?
Well, this wasn't your average loan. Think of it as a whole network with agents who organized pretty much every single step of the trip. Passage, supplies, you name it. Some even provided legal help. We're talking a seriously organized operation here, deeply connected to families and communities back in China.
Wow, so this wasn't just about individual risk, huh? It was about supporting families, villages, this whole network of people back home. That adds a whole other layer to the story, doesn't it?
Absolutely. This is a collective effort, no doubt about it. And the impact, well, let's just say it reached far beyond the goldfields themselves. To really understand the Robewalkers' experiences, we got to understand this financial structure, this social web they were part of. It changes how we see their motivations, their resilience, their entire journey.
This is what I love about these deep dives. We're already starting to see these historical figures in a whole new light, not just some nameless faces in a history book. It really challenges that lone prospector image, doesn't it? And speaking of journeys, did they, actually walk that whole way from Robe to the goldfields? Like, was it that whole desperate scramble we hear about sometimes?
Well, not exactly, no. Turns out, there wasn't just one single route they all took.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing when you look at the sources, how resourceful and adaptable these walkers were.
Right.
I mean, yeah, many did walk the whole distance,
Sure.
but others hopped on coastal steamers. Some even took river boats, And get this, some even tried going through New South Wales or even Tasmania to reach those Victorian goldfields.
Oh, wow. Talk about determination. They really weren't giving up easily. And that really goes against that whole helpless victim story you hear sometimes, doesn't it?
Totally. Look, I'm not saying there weren't hardships. Of course there were. But by and large, these walkers came prepared. They had their wits about them.
They did.
There are accounts from back then describing them arriving in rather good condition. They had supplies. Some even brought things to sell along the way. Imagine that.
It's like they were practically running a traveling market stall.
Right. Entrepreneurial spirit, I tell you.
Absolutely. We even found a quote from a shopkeeper who was amazed by how much cash these walkers had. Really makes you think twice about those old assumptions.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It really adds another layer to the story. But speaking of assumptions, you know what we should talk about? Those myths surrounding the robe walkers. Like all those stories about them building wells and wool sheds, even those stone walls.
Oh, you mean like that Chinaman's well out on the Kerong, the one everyone says those travelers built on their way through?
Exactly, that's the one.
I mean, it's practically legendary around here.
Right. It feels so real, even if you've never seen it yourself.
It's true.
But here's the thing. That structure, unique as it is, it's not really like any well-designed you'd find in China.
Interesting.
So our sources, they really dig into how these myths popped up and, why they've stuck around for so long.
It's like that game, what's it called? Telephone, where a story gets passed around and by the end it's totally different.
Exactly.
It just shows how these stories get embellished and suddenly you've got these grand narratives that don't quite match up with what actually happened.
Right. And the power of a good story, eh?
It's true.
Yeah.
Reminds me of the story my grandfather used to tell about. Well, maybe we'll save that one for another deep dive. But the point is, you really have to think critically about these historical stories, right?
You got it. Oral histories, they're important, sure, but they can get a little, shall we say, creative.
Yeah.
Especially when you don't have much hard evidence to back them up.
Yeah, that makes sense. We even found a story from a local historian talking about people who had these vivid memories of events that happened years before they were even born.
No way, really.
It just goes to show how easily our memories can be tricked, But it's not just about faulty memories, is it? These robe walking myths, I think they also say a lot about how attitudes toward Chinese Australians have changed over time.
Absolutely. You're spot on with that one. These stories, they often reflect let's just say the prejudices and anxieties that were around back then. And let's be honest, some of them haven't gone away, have they?
It's true.
how we remember these stories, how we retell them. It can either challenge those biases or, unfortunately, reinforce them.
It really makes you think about how those changing views affected the stories people told, right? All those stereotypes, those almost romanticized versions of the past. But hey, this deep dive hasn't just been about debunking myths. It's also been about highlighting the resilience of these individuals, the resourcefulness. I mean, just incredible.
Couldn't agree more. Their journey, it really throws a wrench in those simple narratives we often hear about history. It's a good reminder that things were complicated,
Right.
multi-layered, and it encourages us to look beyond the surface, to consider all those different experiences of the people who came before us.
And those complexities, that's what makes history so fascinating, right? It's not just about memorizing dates and names. It's about understanding the forces that shape, well, everything, societies, individuals, the whole shebang. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what would you say is the most important takeaway for our listeners? Why does all of this matter? Not just back then, but today.
Now, that is the question, isn't it? I think at its core, understanding this event, these journeys of the Chinese gold seekers, it gives us a much richer, more accurate picture of Australian history. We're talking about acknowledging the diverse communities that has shaped this nation, their impact on society, culture, identity. It's all intertwined.
It's like we're adding this missing piece to the puzzle,
Yeah.
And it challenges us to re-examine what we think we know, to really confront those overlooked stories.
Exactly. And let's not forget how important those critical thinking skills are, especially in this day and age. I mean, we're bombarded with information, right? So being able to question, to dig a little deeper, to consider different perspective, it's more crucial than ever.
It's so true. And on a human level, I think it speaks to the power of these stories. These journeys, even over 100 years later, they still capture our imaginations, that resilience, that determination. It's a human story that goes beyond time and place. It reminds us that we're all connected, part of this larger story.
Well said. History isn't just about the past, is it? It's about who we are today.
Now, before we go, I have one final thought-provoking question for our listeners. Our sources, they focused a lot on, well, setting the record straight, right? Debunking those myths. But what other parts of the Robe Walkers' stories deserve more attention? What about their lives after the gold rush?
Oh, that's a good one. What happened next? Did they find success? Did they stay in Australia or head back to China? And how did their experiences shape their lives, the lives of their families?
And what about their interactions with the indigenous communities whose lands they traveled through? So much to think about.
Right. So many stories left to uncover.
It's an open invitation to keep exploring, to keep asking those questions, to keep uncovering those hidden chapters of history. And that's what the deep dive is all about. So until next time, stay curious, keep diving deep, and we'll see you on our next adventure into the past.
Okay, some very interesting questions there posed by our bots. It's quite amazing how the AI is able to draw those questions out of the text. I mean, they're all there, but they express them in their own way. And I think they're very important questions, very interesting questions. Well, I would, since obviously they're driving those questions from my own writings. And as I said, if you're interested in purchasing the book, go to the Child Study Press website. You'll find how to order the book there, or you simply write to me at childstudypress@gmail.com. All the information is available on the Podbean or wherever you listen to the podcasts. And I hope you enjoyed this discussion of this most fascinating aspect of Chinese Australian history, and one that's particularly rife with myths, and which as I say, I will do some future podcasts giving you much more detail about what I mean by Chinaman's Well, or the stone walls, or the wool sheds. Locals still believe some of these stories today, even though no matter how implausible they are, both in their own sense, but also, of course, once you look at the actual history. So I hope you enjoyed that, and it gives you some food for thought. Goodbye.